So Claude Code is hands down the world's best AI coding agent, but what makes it better is that it's the first coding agent that we can actually fully customize for our projects. And in this video, guys, I'm going to show you A to Z how to use Claude Code to build and sell apps much faster, much cheaper, and in a much higher quality than ever before. I reviewed the Claude Code Bible by the person that actually created Claude Code in the company Anthropic. That has allowed me to literally give you guys an expert breakdown, even if you've never programmed before. And so guys, by the end of this video, what you're gonna be able to learn is the following. You're gonna be able to see exactly how I set up my agent before I start building an application, and during the actual build out of the app, all of the different commands and tools that can be used for Claude Code. I'm gonna show you how I use them to actually develop apps much faster. So I've already built CreatorOS, which is my AI startup, but now I'm dropping a lot of iOS apps using Claude Code. And this is the tutorial that you guys need to follow along when I start dropping these iOS apps in my No Code Academy. So guys, what we want to do to start is initialize Claude Code. And what that means is actually installing Anthropic's Claude Code inside of your IDE or your actual code base. And so this gives your agent access to the command line interface, which means that this thing has in-depth access to your entire code base. So to initialize our Claude Code agent inside of Cursor or any IDE that we're going to be using, we actually want to copy in this command here, and then we can actually open up whatever tool that we're going to be using. And in this case, guys, we're going to be using Cursor. And so in Cursor, I'm just going to open a brand new project, and we're just going to open a new folder, and we're going to call this the Claude Code test. I'm going to hit create. I'm going to open that baby up. And now that we have the project opened, we want to head to the top right corner here. We want to click toggle panel, and then we want to paste in that link. But sometimes we actually need to add another bit of information to this code called sudo. So we're just going to type in sudo, and we're going to click in enter. Then it's going to ask for the password into your computer. You're going to enter that in. And now we're going to start downloading Claude Code on the global level. Once you guys get through that step, all we have to do is type in Claude, and that's going to open up Anthropic. And we're going to say, do you want to trust these files? And we're going to say yes. Now we're ready to get started, and we can move on to the next step, guys. All right, guys, so now that we've initialized the actual code base, we need to navigate to our project, and we need to give this project a name. And so we're going to head back to Claude, and we're going to add in that cd command. So in the terminal, now that we've connected Anthropic, we should actually open up another node. And so we're going to hit this plus button to actually split up the terminal so we can start adding in some commands. Now, the first command is going to be cd and then the name of the project. And so the same name that we use to actually name the file of the project that we're working on is the name of the CD file that we're going to be using. So in this case, it's going to be called Claude Code Test. And now that we've integrated that, we can move on to the next step. Now that we've initialized with Claude Code, I want to start talking about the different modes that Claude Code has, because right now what we're going to talk about is the plan mode. And so what Claude Code's plan mode does is it creates a safe and secure planning feature that allows Claude to analyze and research code bases without making any changes to your files or system. It's activated by pressing the Shift tab twice, which I'll show you guys in a second, and it's deactivated in the exact same way. Now, this mode is really useful before we start building so that the agent can actually access the internet, write up its entire plan, and work on something called a PRD. Now, this PRD is a product requirements document that the agent can write inside of the code base so it can refer to it at any moment in time. And this is really useful because the agent can then keep track of where it is in the progression of your application build. Claude is literally going to be hand in hand with you, keeping track of where the progress is going and where you're currently at. And so now we're going to go ahead and build this out. But you guys must remember this, and I spoke about this and I've tried to, bang this baby home for a minute, but you should plan first and panic never. Because if you know what APIs you're going to be using, if you know what type of pages that you need to build out are, it becomes a lot easier to actually move forward. And on this channel, guys, you have the full social media app build, so you know exactly how the structure is. And now we're just going to tell the agent about that. So we're going to head over back to the node that has Claude Code, and we're actually going to let it know about what we're working on. But first, we're going to click the tab and shift key so that the agent goes into plan mode. So I just hit it once, and now it's in auto accept mode. I'm going to hit it again, and now we are in plan mode. So now the next thing I want to talk about, guys, is the agent has different types of thinking modes. There's ultra think mode, there's think hard mode, and then there's the regular think mode. And in this example, since we're planning out our application, we want to go in ultra think mode. And so the first thing we're going to write is ultra think. Then the next thing we're going to write is the actual complete breakdown of our application. And so in this example, I'm going to be building a social media app that's very similar to the company called Hootsuite. And so that's what my prompt's going to be here. And then I'm going to tell the agent to research all of the API docs that are associated to my project. And you also want to talk about the tech stack that you're going to be using. Since we're building this as an iOS app, there's two different ways that the project could actually be built. It could be built directly in the Swift UI, which is Apple's coding infrastructure, or it could be built in React Native using Expo Go, which allows you to develop apps for both Android and iOS at the same time. And in this example, we're going to be using Expo Go. And so I'm also going to let the agent know about that. All right, guys, so after writing UltraThink, I said I'm building an iOS app using Expo Go. The goal of the application is to be the ultimate social media hub for any creator or any business. They can connect all of their social profiles to the same app, and we are using the AirShare API to integrate all of these social media API calls. And we're going to be using Stripe as our payment machine to receive payments and track our users' plans. Please build this out and the entire PRD and add it to the Claude Code directory and write up the entire Claude Code.md to see what is happening. And so we're going to send this message in, and I'm just going to stay on cursor for a sec just to show you guys how Claude is going to now go about this. And so now we can see that it's going into its full thinking process, and then it's going to start asking us questions if it wants us to proceed. And this is where we can let Claude actually go into auto accept mode. And so you get three options on how to respond. And we always want to select the second option because we want it to always, do its tasks without asking us. So we're going to check that off. And we're going to let it go to work. And just like that, guys, we can see that it's doing multiple web searches at the same time. It's first doing the AirShare API web search, then it's doing the Expo React Native web search, and then the Subagents authentication and Stripe payments integration. And so those are all the things that we spoke about. And so this agent, even before we start building, is going to have a super in-depth understanding of how things are going to be built. Now, let me just explain one more thing in depth for you guys, and that is the Claude.md file. So this Claude.md file is basically like a glorified system prompt that the agent can write for itself. So while I gave it that plan mode instructions, Claude is actually going to go and review all of the different steps that are needed to actually build out the app. It's then going to understand the actual context and the actual goal of the application, why users would even want it. And then it's going to add all of that information into the Claude.md file, which is going to be embedded inside of the code base. Why is this important? Well, this is what Claude will always refer to before it starts working. So when we send in a prompt, Claude will then check the MD file and then it'll start building. And so checking out the Claude.md file consistently is very important. And also giving it your own personal instructions could be beneficial. And so the agent just gave us Claude's plan. And so it gave us the project overview, a comprehensive iOS app using Expo Go that serves as the ultimate social media hub for creators and businesses, integrating the AirShare API, Subagents, and Stripe. Then it talks about the files that it needs to create. It's going to create the product requirements document to give us a complete breakdown of what we're going to be doing to build this out. And then the key components that it needs to document as things go on. So the actual tech stack, we need to be using the Expo SDK 53. It breaks down that AirShare API, gives us access to 13 social platforms and all this fun stuff. And so what we're going to do is we're going to click yes and auto accept edits. And now it's going to go ahead and finish up the planning phase. All right, so Claude just finished up the PRD and the Claude.md file, and we can see what the output is here. And so it's understanding how to integrate with actual coding examples. And it's put all of this into the Claude.md file so we could refer to this when we actually get to these steps in the development process. There are many integrations with this app build that are actually quite difficult to do. And so when you're talking to the AI agent, it's better that it has this knowledge base. And this is just one example of why Claude Code is so much more powerful of a coding agent than anyone else's coding agents, because it gives us, for the first time, the ability to actually program it in this type of way. And it also broke down the PRD in a similar type of manner, which gives us the complete breakdown of how to run it. And it also broke down all of the different dependencies and commands that we can run, because running these commands could get confusing and also waste a lot of time to know which fucking commands to actually run in the terminal to get your application to run. And now we can also refer to this in the Claude.md file whenever we'd like. So the last question Claude gave us is, do you want to create a Claude.md file? We're going to say yes, and don't ever ask this again. And we're going to hit enter. Now we can move on to the next step of the build, guys. So we initialized Claude Code, then we built out the plan mode. Now let's talk about the commands and the custom commands that we're going to be using to actually run our agent effectively. I want you to think of this as you sitting on a throne, having access to the most powerful model in the entire world that can build literally anything. But we need to understand these commands because this allows us to really customize and debug any issues that our agent is having. And so there are a bunch of different commands, right? But I only highlighted the ones that are actually necessary, and we're going to break them down together. So the first one that's actually necessary, guys, is the /resume command. And what this allows us to do is resume any conversation that we've previously had with our Claude Code agent. And this is really important because let's say you turned off your computer or you ran out of tokens and then you came back to your computer 4 hours later. Well, you don't want to start with a fresh Claude Code conversation. You want to go back to the one that you were previously working on. And so the /resume command does this beautifully. Now, the next one we're going to get into in the next part of the build, which is the /agents, but this allows us to build customized, specialized sub-agents that save us costs and run in parallel. And I want you just to refer to this Matthew McConaughey meme because that's essentially what we're going to be working on, Claude Code running multiple agents at the same time. And if you're not doing that already, we're going to pump up those numbers, baby. Now, the next command that I'm a fan of is the /compact command. And what this does is it grabs the entire conversation that you had with Claude Code and then it summarizes it. And then you can copy that summarized conversation and take it to any other coding agent. And I'm actually going to show you guys how that compact works right now. So let's say we were working on this project and we ran out of tokens with Claude Code. Well, then we can literally just write /compact and it's now going to start compacting the conversation. So the agent just finished up and now it says click Control+R to see the full summary. And so that's what I'm going to do here. And now we can see this entire compact summary. And so let's just say, right, we ran out of tokens with Claude Code for this time period. We could just copy the entire summary and then we can head over to our cursor agent and we can paste this in and we can say we are continuing from where we left off with the previous coding agent. And then we'll just send that in. And now cursor is going to read over the entire conversation. It's going to give us the entire project overview, the technical stack. And now I can continue developing with cursor while we wait for our Claude Code tokens to reset. Now, the next command is the /doctor command. Now, if there's any errors that are happening inside of Claude Code, you're actually going to see it within the terminal. And so right now we don't have any errors, but if you did, you want to run that /doctor command to actually see what's going on because that thing will tell you exactly how to fix any problems that your agent is having. Now, guys, one of the most important commands is this /init command because this initializes the project with your Claude Code agent and it writes out that Claude.md guide that we were talking about. And so let's say we were mid build or we were using replit for our build halfway through and now we added Claude Code. It's not too late. All we have to do is let the agent know of this init command so it can actually review the entire code base. And so what this actual command does is it reviews the entire documentation that is inside of your code base. And so if I were to send this in, it'll do the exact same thing as the plan mode that I showed you, but just by looking at the code instead of my instructions. And so here we could see the agent's thought process. It goes, let me analyze the code base and create the Claude file, but then it realized that it already has a Claude file. And then here's the response. It says, here's already a Claude in the code base. Looking at the console, this appears to be really good. So it's all ready to go. But that's another way that you can initialize your agent, even if you added him midway through the build. Now, for the time being, the last command that I really want to harp on here is the review request command with the ultra think mode. So let's just say that this project was completely finished and we were ready to go. We can then do that command. We can just run this review command and then it's just going to run the pull request and just check everything to make sure that, you know, what's happening inside of our GitHub repo. And so this is when you pushed your code base to GitHub and you wanted to check everything that's happening. And so here we could see that the agent identified that we haven't turned this into a Git repository yet. And then it's going to start running the commands to actually turn it into a repository so that it could actually review the entire code base from GitHub. All right, cool guys. So we've initialized Claude Code. We did the plan mode. We initialized the Claude.md and the PRD files, and then we broke down the Claude commands. And now let's talk about the Claude Code sub agents. And so what the sub-agents does in a nutshell, in a very simplified way, is that it grabs the orchestrator agent or the main Claude Code agent, and it passes off the tasks to different specialized agents, and this saves us token costs. It also streamlines your build because these specialized agents can have their own context memory. And so if we created like a front-end coding agent, a back-end coding agent, for example, these agents will have access to their own context windows. And so they'll all be running on Claude Sonnet 4, but they'll all also have their own 200 token window. And this allows us to really specialize what these sub-agents do. And in this example here, we can see in this image that there's a front-end sub-agent, back-end, testing, and security. Now, these are also really important because like a testing sub-agent, for example, can trigger off every single time that you finished up a completion. So let's say I integrated an API, or let's say I integrated Stripe, or I worked on a new feature, and we want to test that feature. Well, we can actually run the testing sub-agent to go and do that instead of wasting our own time to go ahead and build those out. And so when you have your agents actually built, you're going to see them working inside of that terminal, and they all have their own specialized colors that you're going to be able to, choose and deploy on your own. And then they'll have access to their own set of tools. And so we could see in this example that the backend architect, for example, ran 4 different tools. It generated 2.3K in tokens to actually generate the answer. And when these sub agents create their answer, they report back to the final agent with something like this that says, here are my findings. And this orchestrator agent can spin up to 10 parallel sub agents. And so you can literally have like an API integrator, testing sub agent, database sub agent, security, backend, front end, and anything else that's like relevant to your build. So let's go ahead and let's integrate those. And the command that we need to integrate them with is the /agents command. And so what we're going to do in the terminal here is we're just going to write /agents, and we're just going to click enter for it to show us what agents we currently have built so far. And we can see that there's no agents that are found, which is totally expected. And so now we're just going to click enter to create new agent, and we get the option to create it on the project level or on the personal level. So on the personal level basically means that these sub agents will work for any project that you're working on with your Claude Code model, or at the project level, which is only based on the current project that we're working on. And so we're just going to work on the current project, and we're going to let Claude Code generate the agent. And now we're just going to give the description of what it is. And so since the AirShare API, for example, is very difficult to integrate for this type of application, that is a specialized sub agent that I would actually want to have. So we're going to write that out. So I just wrote, I want a specialized sub agent that works on all of the AirShare API integrations. It will be a specialist in this part of the build, as the AirShare API is quite intense and needs careful integrations. And we're just going to click enter. And now the agent has gone ahead and started to build out this sub agent. Now in step 4 of creating the agent, you actually get to choose whether or not you want to give it all of the tools, only the read tools, only the edit tools, or only the execution tools. And in this example, we want to give it all of the above because this is one of the hardest things to do for this build, which is integrating the AirShare API. So it needs to be able to read, edit, and execute. And so we're just going to choose the all tools option, and then we're going to go continue. Now for the model, we can choose which model we want. In this example, we're going to use the Claude Sonnet 4. And for the color, we're just going to choose red. And here we can see the preview now is the AirShare API specialist. So we're going to hit that and enter. Now the next agent that's important is actually your database schema agent that knows how to build the tables that are necessary to store the data that we're going to be getting back from all of the social media platforms. And so in this example, I just gave it the prompt that says, I need a database schema agent. We're going to use Claude Sonnet 4 again. And then this time we'll use the blue color. So I just added 3 sub agents. We have the front-end developer, the AirShare API specialist, and the Subagents database schema manager. Now I'm going to add one more agent to show you guys how we can give it a different set of tools. And this agent is going to be the testing agent to make sure that the new thing that we have implemented actually works before we continue to build. And then I'm going to show you guys how all 4 of these agents can actually work simultaneously. And so what we're going to do first is we're going to create a new agent. We're going to go into the project. We're going to let Claude generate it. And in this example, we're going to write, you are the testing agent. You need to test the features on the application that was recently implemented by Claude. You need to then report back whether or not the test worked or failed. If the test failed, then please let the orchestrator agent know of the error message. Now I'm going to click enter. We're going to let the agent configure this sub agent. But this time, guys, we're going to scroll down and we're just going to let it do the execution tools. And so the only thing we have now checked off is the execution tools. And we're going to go up to continue and we're going to click enter and we're going to get this baby going. We're going to give it a nice orange color and we're just going to click S to save it. And now we have 4 agents added to our project. So I'm going to go back to our real Claude model. We can actually task these agents to go and do stuff. So this prompt's going to say, use the Airshare API specialist to do a deep dive on the Airshare API docs by doing a web search. And then I said, we want to be really focusing on the following API calls: the connect socials, the post content, the media, the messages, and the analytics API calls specifically. We then want to pass that information or relay that information to the database schema agent so that it can understand what tables and what database design we actually need to properly store all of the Airshare API data that we're going to be getting from that first agent step. After that, the database agent can pass the information to the front end agent on how to actually design the application based on all of the data that we're going to be getting. There should be a dashboard, there should be a post content page, there should be an analytics page, and hopefully the agent can understand that. And once it understands that, it will go ahead and build out the front end UI. And then we're going to hire our feature tester agent to actually go ahead and test to make sure that the application is running smoothly. And so we're just going to send this prompt in, and you guys are now going to see in the terminal when these different agents are firing up. So we first got a message back that says, I'll coordinate a comprehensive discovery and development process using the specialized agents. Let me start by creating a to-do list to track this multi-agent workflow. And just like that, guys, we have now launched the Airshare API specialist, which is now initializing. And we can now see that it wants to go and access the docs that we needed it to access. So it understands how to make the API calls. And there we go. Now inside of the agents tab, we can see that it has now allowed the permission to go and fetch this domain URL. So it'll never ask us that again. Now, another thing I really need to point out here, guys, is that it's only used 664 tokens. If we weren't using the sub agent to go and do this task, it would have literally used thousands of tokens, which would have meant that we would have ran out of our allocated amount in this period much faster. And so this is just another reason why it's very important to have these subagents. But the core reason why is that the specialization of the subagents allows us to build much faster, because now the Airshare API specialist will literally know everything it needs to actually integrate the API correctly. While we're waiting, this may be a little bit boring and you guys might get off track or whatever because you're sitting here and waiting. And a huge hack that you can use to actually get past this waiting period is by adding something called a reference hook. Now, a reference hook is a path that the agent goes through every single time that you give it a task. And so let's say we gave it a task to add a sign up button, and then it integrated the sign up button, and then it finished its task. Somewhere in that process, it'll reach the reference hook of, okay, Claude is now done. When that reference hook gets triggered, we can create a sound effect, we can create a push notification that sends a notification to my phone or makes a sound on the screen that notifies me that the task is done. Let's say I was editing a video, or let's say I was filming a video while developing at the same time, and then I hear the ding. Now I know to go back inside of Cursor and continue to build. And in this way, we're also not missing the moments when Claude finishes, and that also saves a lot of time. All right, so the Airshare API specialist just finished off. It took about 5 minutes. Now it's moving on to the design database schema step. And so now what should happen is the database schema subagent gets activated and initialized in the next message. There we go. And now it's going to start working on that step. And we can also look inside of the Airshare API specialist just to see what it's added so far. And it's given a somewhat early and primitive breakdown of what it needs to actually use to integrate all of the different things. So for posting failures, for authentication issues, when working with the API integration on Airshare, make sure that the API key is configured and all this other stuff as well. So decent start from that subagent. And now we can see all of the to-dos from the database agent, which is going to go and basically implement the social platform connections with OAuth token management, all of this headache that we don't really have to deal with anymore. Now guys, while this is happening, I want to let you know that this entire application is actually what's going to be in our next tutorial, where I'm going to show you guys A to Z how I'm building the social media iOS app. And then it's also going to be given as an entire code base in the No Code Academy. So you can literally go in there, fork the code base, and then push it to the App Store as your own product. And so this is how I would set up the entire build. And once these subagents get initialized and they understand everything that they need to do, I would go directly into building out this app. And so that is how to build apps with Claude Code 100 times faster than ever before, at a reduced cost and at a much higher quality, so that you can actually produce apps that are on par with real developers. I hope this helped, and I'll see you guys in the next one.